Welcome to the Buy Singlets Children's Book Bazaar 2021. For today's event, we have
We
Dr.
have
Denise
Dr.
Lai Chua
Denise
to
Lai
share
Chua
snippets
to
from
share snippets
empirical
from
studies
empirical
on how
studies.
mutual acts of remembering, retelling, and sense-making can help nurture a happier and healthier child. At the same time, she will recount how writing the book was her attempt at connecting fragments of her personal past into a coherent narrative for her own wholeness, and by extension, her children's. Let's welcome Dr. Denise Lai Chua to the show.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Um, I'm really, honored actually to be speaking to you tonight. And I know some of you personally, I believe. Some of you I don't know. Thank you very much for being here. Since I don't know you, I'll just introduce myself very briefly. So I'm Denise, and I have written a book. It's called Preschool in the Wilderness. And I wrote it, for different audiences and for different reasons. And one of those reasons was to document memories. I think what I'll do now is I'll just start by sharing my slides, and then I'll tell you a bit more as we go along. Okay? Okay, so I wrote the book last year in the middle of the COVID pandemic and lockdown. And it's a book that I wanted to write for many years. It became all the more important for me to write it when I had already achieved some distance from running WeCare. I had run WeCare for 21 years, and a lot of things happened. Running the school, there were really good times, and there were times that were incredibly stressful. And after I had achieved some distance from the school, I started to process what had actually happened. And I felt like there were many segments or portions of that whole story that needed to be put into a coherent narrative, not just for myself, but also for the people whom I care about. And these included my family, my children. It included former staff members. It included former clients, former parents. And you read the book, I think you'll understand why. Because at the end of those 21 years, I walked away. I sold the school. I sold the preschool, and but for many many reasons. And I think many people had many questions about why I did that. So it's a book that documents memories, not just as a teacher, but also as a woman, as a mother, as a sister, as a daughter, and also being a female leader. There were definitely a lot of challenges in running the school that not everyone would understand, because you're not selling food, you're not selling, some luxury product. You're actually serving children and you're serving families. Okay, so the book was written primarily for a number of audiences. One was early childhood educators, of course. Another one was, of course, for parents and former clients, former families. I also wrote it for policymakers and for academics. But what I was trying to do was to create something called an evocative autoethnography. And let me just explain what that means. Evocative because it's meant to be emotive. It's meant to be full of feeling, not so much all about logic and facts and rationality, but really about memories and subjectivities. And autoethnography, that word comes from a combination of two words, autobiography and ethnography, which is really a story about yourself within the culture that you're in. And when we mean culture, we also mean the social, political culture, right? The that part of our lives that we cannot detach ourselves from, because we are part of that context, part of that society. Okay, so while I was writing the book, I was trying to document memories, and after I'd finished writing it, I had a number of people read it. One of which was my husband, and and he said to me, "Oh, this is a really good documentation for our own children." And I realized when after he said that I was glad that I had done it, because writing, um, I think while I was running WeCare, I was also trying to raise my children. And at the back of my mind, I always felt a lot of guilt as a mother that I was serving or teaching other people's children, but I was not at home for my own children. And so I think writing the book was about being able to also explain to my children, well, this is what mommy was doing, and this is why I was doing it. And these were some of the joys, these were some of the challenges, these were some of the griefs, and I left it with a lot of hope. Okay, so that's what the book is. But really, today's talk is on that bit about memories. Why are memories important? As I was reflecting after writing the book and starting to do some research on memories, I realized that a mother's role in creating memories for her children is really, really important. Okay. Now, I don't know whether there are any fathers out there. I will say something to fathers, but because I'm a mom, I will be speaking as a mom tonight. Okay. What are memories? Well, memories are made of these, right? I'm going to be referring to a few people tonight. Really referred to my husband, but if you look at the picture on the left, you'll see me. I'm the baby. I'm 1 year. It's my 1-year-old birthday, and my mom is next to me. She's the one who's the only adult in that picture who's smiling, right? And then on the right, you'll see my mom again with my 3 daughters, okay? And I'll make references to them, so I thought I'll show a picture of who they are. Okay, now, before you think that, oh, this is about academic memory, I just want to say there are different types of memory. And tonight's talk is on one particular kind of memory. Just for those of you who are interested, let me just quickly tell you what the different types of memory are according to cognitive psychologists, okay? There's sensory memory, and this is where we hold sensory information for a very short period of time, usually 1 second or less, like a particular smell or a particular sound. And then there's, of course, working memory, which is similar to short-term memory, but it's used where or when a person is manipulating information. So, for instance, if I am trying to do a mathematical sum in my head, like 10 minus 2, I am holding 10 in my head, and I have to minus 2. Okay, so this is short-term memory. It's called working memory. Okay, there's also something specific called short-term memory, which is a type of short-lived storage that can only hold a few pieces of information. So if you are, say, needing to remember that this is the telephone number that I have to call, and you're just holding in your memory for a very short period of time, that's short-term memory. And then, of course, there's long-term memory, which stores a wide range of memories and experiences. And today's talk is about long-term memory. But what kind of long-term memory? Okay, there are 2 types of long-term memory. And please bear with me, this is just the most academic bit of tonight's talk, okay? But I just I feel like I really need to tell you this so that you know where I'm coming from. There's explicit long-term memory, which are conscious memories. And then there are implicit forms of long-term memory, which are memories that influence a person's behavior but not consciously. So what sort of explicit conscious memories do we have? There's episodic memory or semantic memory. Now, for those of you who are thinking about memory in terms of facts and figures, that's semantic memory. But episodic memory is the kind of memory that I'm talking about tonight. Memories of events or autobiographical facts. Events from childhood, and in my case, stories from when I ran WeCare for 21 years, okay? What are implicit forms of memory? It's things like procedural memory, where a person needs it to perform a familiar task like driving, or priming, when experiences influence behavior. Now, you might be wondering what priming is. I'll just give a very, very quick example. My refrigerator door is, it's got shelves and it's full of things. And I realized that I'm actually quite primed, that when I open my refrigerator door, my left hand's ready to catch anything that falls because I've got a lot of things on the shelves. Okay, now that's priming. I'm not conscious of that memory, but it is definitely an implicit memory where it's happened before, things have fallen off the shelves when I pulled the door open, so I'm primed to catch them. Okay, that's implicit memory. But if there's only one thing you want to remember from tonight, then just remember that autobiographical memories is from our episodic memory system, and they contain memories of past events that are specific. Remember that word specific, because we're going to come to it quite a number of times tonight. They're of personal significance, and they are remembered over the lifespan. Okay, they contribute to who you are. And I'll tell you why as we go along, why we need to be thinking of autobiographical memories. The reason being that they contribute to our identity. And I think, growing up in an Asian culture, we tend to think of memory as, do you have a good memory for how you write that Chinese word, or how you do that mathematical sum? Do you remember the formula? Well, autobiographical memories actually play a really key role in not just who we are, but also our mental health. Okay, and why is that? Why is remembering facts and figures or formulae not as important to our wholeness? Well, this is why. Because autobiographical memories are really rich with thoughts, emotions, and evaluations about what happened. We don't just remember this happened on this day at this time. It's infused with what we were thinking at the time, what we were feeling at the time, and what we thought of what was happening at the time. And autobiographical memories also provide explanations filled with human intentions and motivations. Like, yeah, remember when we, went to that show and this person did this? We always, impute a sort of intention or motivation, right? Yeah, he was trying to, or she was trying to. There's always that element to it, right? And when you take all of our autobiographical memories together, they comprise the story of our lives. And it's not just, who, where, what, when. It's really about the interactions and the relationships. Okay? So, in a very deep sense, they provide a sense of self through a narrative identity. Now, you might be wondering what that means. What's a narrative identity? Well, just think right now of a memory that you have, an autobiographical memory. Okay, it could be something like you going on holiday with your child, and what you did during that holiday. So I have a memory, say, of taking my children on a vacation to Bintan, say, and these were the things that we did. And when I tell those stories, like, oh yeah, here's Tamara, my second daughter, she's playing in this stuff, and this is where baby Casey was crying all the time. What's happening there is I'm developing. This is my story, right? This is an example from my autobiographical memory. It's giving me a sense of like I was the mom, and I was there, watching them doing these things, and I was there trying to comfort the baby, or I was there making sure that Tamara didn't drown in the surf, and there's a narrative identity that builds through these autobiographical memories. Okay, and so that's that is what happens when we have these memories. And the thing is, we don't just remember for the sake of remembering, often to tell them to others. Okay, there may be times when you remember something and you just remember it. But most of the time, if you think about it, especially when it's a story, when it's a narrative, when it's part of your autobiography, we all want to be heard. And language is the medium through which we remember, especially with others. Now, in this day and age with technology, people are making videos, and so there's the visual and the words, and sometimes there's music, and sometimes there's lots of graphics involved. But essentially, how we communicate our stories is through language. Okay, and I'll come back to this, because when we look at when we look at what the research says about maternal reminiscing with their children, language plays a very big part. Okay. Now, the power of narratives, like I said, we can tell the stories in a spoken way, or we can write the stories. I chose to write them, and you can do both. I know a lot of people who choose not to use this kind of spoken, verbal, written language, and they want to do it through dance, they want to do it through drama, they want to do it through art, and I think that's fine. And obviously, you know, I'd want you to be finding your voice in whatever medium works for you. But for people to understand, you know, what that narrative meant or what that memory meant, you probably have to explain it, and we explain it through language. So when we look deeper into autobiographical narratives, you know, we ask ourselves, okay, what are they doing? What are these narratives doing? Well, number one, they're enabling the individual to structure their experiences in a way that facilitates reflection and comprehension. Okay, so I'm thinking about say my book, say, you know, my memories of we care running the preschool. You know, I remember the good times. I remember the stressful times. I remember the times when parents screamed at me. I remember the times when I had issues with, say, with human resources. I remember the times when it was really stressful with landlords. I remember the times when I had lovely times teaching the children, or when, worst times when children fell down and we had to rush them to the emergency room. So when we develop a narrative, we're actually structuring those memories in a way that allows us to make sense of it. I think that's the first thing. And as we're making sense of it, it's actually developing our own identity. Okay. And so when I was writing the book, I realized, and obviously I wasn't thinking about these things when I was running WeCare. I wasn't thinking about, oh, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter. I mean, I was probably experiencing it, but I wasn't thinking about it consciously. But when I started to write it, I realized there were so many layers to that story, or to my story during those years, that I realized I had quite a complicated identity at that time. I wanted to be both a mother and a daughter, but I also had to be a teacher. I also had to be an employer. I had to be, you know, I had to be all these things to so many people. And so it became a very complicated identity. And the book is really about how I navigated through it all, not successfully and not happily all the time, but I somehow got through it. And hopefully it'll have lessons for other women who want to do the same in the future. But coming back to autobiographical narratives, how do autobiographical narratives develop? Well, they develop through social interactions between parents and their children, and children with families. And as the autobiographical narratives develop, they are defining the person's memory, the person's self, and the person's identity. Now, as you're developing yourself, as you're defining yourself in your story, it's actually refining your story. Okay, so there's a vice versa, an iterative process that's going on. It's developing you. The memories are developing you, but you are also refining the memories as you go along. Okay, so the function of personal narratives, they define yourself, they define your relationships with others. You could use them just to entertain, the people who are listening, which I do quite a lot when we, at home, when we talk about family holidays and what happened, like the time when Tamara was, my middle one was really young, and we were sitting on top of an elephant in somewhere in Thailand, and I almost fell off, and she almost fell off, and my memory of that is just trying to make sure that she didn't fall off, just to save her life, so that she didn't break a bone. So sometimes you tell these stories just to entertain, obviously, but sometimes you're doing it for identity purposes. And another reason, the fourth reason, is to regulate emotional experiences by drawing moral and life lessons from them. Okay, so if you have a memory, say, of, I lost my temper with that person, when you're reflecting on that memory, you're probably drawing a lesson from that, like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that, maybe I should have avoided that topic altogether, or maybe we should have, I should have spoken about it in that way. Okay, so memories and narratives, personal narratives, are regulating emotional experiences. Okay, now for those of you who are here because you want to know how your memories and what you can do when you are talking about past events with your children, why is it important and when is it important? Well, the first thing about when it is important is there are two major developmental periods when we see great changes in autobiographical memory. The first one is during the preschool years. Okay, why? Because parent-guided narrative co-constructions of the past, and I'm going to explain that in a bit, facilitate the child's developing autobiographical memories and emerging self-concepts. Okay, so there's a lot there. Let me explain what that means. Parent-guided. You have to be part of that process of helping your child remember the past events, and the past. Okay, so parent guided. Narrative co-constructions, what does that mean? It's not just your child constructing the past, you are part of that co-construction of the past. So if your child comes back from school and says, so and so pushed me, okay, you're there as a guide and you are co-constructing that memory with your child. So you might be saying like, oh, did something happen? Were you all rushing to get a ball, or you're part of that process. And while you're doing that, you're facilitating your child's language, obviously, but you're also facilitating your child's ability to remember the past. And you're developing, whether you believe it or not, you're developing your child's self-concept. Like, oh, but you didn't push back. Oh wow, what a good boy you are. What a good girl you are. And how patient and how understanding you are. You are part of that process. Okay. The second major developmental period is, yeah, you guessed it, adolescence. Okay, the teenage years. And what's happening here is it's quite a lot that goes on in the teenage years. Number one, the teenage brain is going through massive change in terms of social and cognitive skills. And there's this push, not just in terms of neurological development, but also in terms of the social emotional development, that they are trying to build an adult identity. Okay. And then, of course, there's the cultural forms of being able to express who they are. Okay. So in Singapore, and again, culturally, I think things are changing with technology. How they're expressing their biographies and autobiographies now is probably through Instagram or TikTok. I'm not sure, but all that comes together during adolescence, and they're developing, and you're seeing changes in the way they remember themselves in the past during these two periods. Okay, so before I get into how, as a mother, you can help develop your child's memories with the aim to develop your child's social and emotional health, let me just say that there are gender differences when we remember things. Okay? Women are socialized to construct their identities around the more emotional and relational parts of their experiences. And men tend to construct their identities around the more independent and achievement aspects of their experiences. Okay. As a result, girls tend to tell longer personal narratives than boys, and they express more internal language, would be more emotion-based language, okay, than boys. Now, two things I just want to say there. Number one, if you're a father listening in, and after you hear all of what I have to say about, how mothers remember and how mothers should remember things with their children, and you think like, oh, I have to be like that, I just want to say stop. If you're a dad, you don't have to do it the way your wives are doing it. Okay, you don't have to do it like a woman. In fact, research has shown that if a father tries to remember the past with their child the way a woman would, there's actually a backlash. It's actually documented in research. There's actually a bit of a backlash that it can actually make your child more insecure and have more internalizing and externalizing problems. That means they could be more anxious in the end, or they could have more behavior problems in the end. And why is that the case? Well, researchers think that it's because when a child goes to his or her father, they're actually looking for something else. They're looking for maybe a more factual, objective approach, a more pragmatic approach, and they go to their mothers more for the emotive bits of their lives. Okay, so it's okay actually if you're a dad and you're thinking, I'm not going to be talking like that to my child. It's okay. You can be a dad and talk the way you want to talk to your child. You're playing quite a different role. You're playing quite a different part in your child's life. Having said that, this is the second thing. We also know from other forms of research that men are not always able to express their emotions. Okay, there was very, very large body of research in this regard, and it's because they're socialized to kind of bottle it up and not admit to fear, not admit to anxiety, not admit to sadness and things like that. I think, if you're a father listening in and you want to know what's the best way forward, I think that being your factual, independent, pragmatic self with kindness and allowing your children to express their emotions, I think that's the best way forward. Okay, so you have a different balancing role to play, just like women have a different balancing role to play. Okay, so that's what I want to say to dads in case you're here listening. You do have a role to play. You are important, but this talk really is about what mothers can do for their children. Okay, let's just move on. So maternal reminiscing about past shared events. When mothers talk to their children about what happened in the past, what happens in the long term, well, researchers have found that it develops the child's skills in remembering. Yeah, children whose mothers remember things with them are better at remembering. Full stop. Okay, and the memory skills learned appear to transfer to other contexts. If they can remember things with their moms, they tend to be able to remember things with their peers and with their teachers, and it carries over to other parts of their lives. And children who trust more in maternal support, meaning they are not insecure about their mother's love, and they know that if they go to their mother, they will get support from their mothers. They tend to communicate more with their mothers about their experiences, and in turn have more specific autobiographical memories. Now, remember that word, more specific. Why is this important? It's really important, okay? Researchers have found that if people cannot remember specific autobiographical memories, it leads to overgeneral memories like, I never get invited, nobody likes me. Now that's really general, right? And it's a very global sort of statement. I never get invited. Nobody likes me. I have no friends. Um, this sort of thinking over general memories, they've been implicated in problems such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, impaired problem solving, and unhealthy repetitive thinking. Wow, that's a lot to take in. Just because I don't have specific memories, well, it's not because you don't have specific memories. It's because in your mind, you're just having very general thoughts about yourself, and these thoughts, these general thoughts, are too global, and most of the time they are too negative. Instead of thinking, yeah, I didn't get invited to that party, but I did get invited to that party. That, yeah, I don't have a lot of friends, but I do have some friends. I do have some very close friends, and I do have some very good times with some important people in my life. Now that's specific, and that actually contributes to mental health, not the other way, which is when you start to think in global terms like, oh, I'm this horrible person, or I'm not a popular person. Okay? Now, where does that leave us? Okay, how then, as mothers, should we be helping our children to reminisce about negative events in particular? When children experience negative events, the emotion regulation function is critical to their mental health. Okay, so when a parent and a child reminisce about that negative event, what the parent is doing to regulate the child's emotions is critical to their mental health. And here I'm going to give a memory that I remembered while preparing the slides. I must have been about seven, or well, no, probably not seven. I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, and I I was sitting in class uh, in school, and I had a couple of friends around me, and they started to pass me these little notes on paper. I mean, we were all very young. We were like in primary 2 or 3, and they started passing me these notes. And this is my memory. And I remember reading those notes, and they were very, very hurtful notes. They were saying horrible things about me, like I was stupid, or I was ugly, or I'm mean, or I'm not a nice person. I honestly can't remember the exact details, but I remember reading those notes and feeling so hurt and feeling so sad. And at the time, I had no way to express my hurts. I was about 8 or 9 years old. I didn't know what to do about those notes. So I remember I took them home, and I folded them up into small little bits of paper, and I took them to where my parents, we were living in a 3-room flat in Toa Payoh, and um, there was a telephone, and there was a little telephone book. My mom had a little telephone book, and I slipped those notes into the telephone book because I didn't want to read them anymore. I didn't want them close to me anymore. They were so hurtful, the things that my friends had written, my classmates had written. And lo and behold, I think it was the next day or 2 days later, my mother was cleaning things up as she usually, does. And she found these little notes. And the first thing she said was, Denise, did somebody write these notes to you? And I remember when she said that, and she was holding those things that I had folded up and tried to hide away, wanting to block them from my memory for the rest of my life. I burst into tears because I thought, like, oh my gosh, my mom's found it. Like, now she knows I'm a horrible person or something, like these people say I'm a horrible person. And now my mom knows I'm a horrible person. And I remember my mom sitting down with me and reading them and saying, you know, these girls are very mean. They're terrible. They're terrible people. They're terrible girls. And I remember, I think she took them and she threw the notes away. Now, I cannot remember whether my mother ever went to school and spoke to the teacher, or I don't know what happened. But I do remember that when my mother said, these girls are not nice to you in doing what they've done, it helped to regulate my emotions, because I started to realize that she was interpreting and evaluating the emotionally negative experience in a way that was giving it a different meaning to what I had assumed. Okay, and why? Because as she was focusing on my feelings, like you must be very hurt, and giving a causal explanation, like these girls are so mean to have written these things to you. Um, they they were it was these this that conversation was helping me to see things from a broader perspective. Okay, it wasn't just about who did this, why did they say this, did you tell the teacher, that's not what it was about. It was about, are you okay? You must be very hurt. And we can chuck these notes out now. They don't belong in our home. Okay, so that's an example of how, as a mom, you're regulating the emotions of your child after your child has experienced something negative, and you're interpreting and evaluating it and giving it causal explanations and a different perspective. What are some of the outcomes when you do this for your child? I mean, there are significant mental health outcomes. There's number one, um, outcomes on social well-being. And this is all from many studies that have been collated. Number one, in-depth discussion of negative emotions predicts higher levels of emotional understanding in preschool children. Okay, so for instance, in my case, knowing that you could be hurt because somebody has said something mean to you, that develops your emotional understanding that words can hurt others, right? And B, validation of negative emotions actually predicts higher levels of pro-social relationships in preschool children. Because, yes, you've been hurt, you know not to hurt. And so it develops the child's ability to feel and empathize with other children, other people. Okay, so first mental health outcome on the child's social well-being. Second mental health outcome is on emotional well-being. And again, this is all from research. A, discussion of negative emotions during reminiscing actually predict lower levels of aggression in children. So you know how in some cultures we don't want to talk about negative emotions, we don't want to talk about sadness, we don't want to talk about anger, we don't want to talk about frustration, and we kind of just bottle it up because it's not appropriate to talk about these things. Actually, when you don't do that, people get more aggressive and children get more aggressive. So please, if you know that your child's going through something very stressful or has gone through something very stressful, it's actually better to name the negative emotion. B, mothers who mention more emotions in discussions of chronic events, like, say, a child who's chronically ill, have children with fewer internalizing and externalizing behaviors. Internalizing behaviors are behaviors like withdrawal, depression, anxiety. Externalizing behaviors are behavior problems like acting out, throwing things, biting, scratching, hurting physically other people. Okay, so when you discuss a past event that was negative, but you mention the emotions, you name the emotions, like you must have been very scared, you must have been very angry, your child actually, there's some sort of release, and your child then doesn't bottle things up and doesn't feel that he or she needs to express it externally through his or her behavior. And C, mothers who provide more causal explanations have children who show fewer externalizing behavior problems. In other words, you can't just name the emotion, you've got to give an explanation for it. Yes, you were upset because, or you were hurt because she said this about you, okay? Or you must have been so frustrated because the teacher, da 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 da, okay? So giving the causal explanation actually helps your child as well. Moreover, we also know from research that when you refer to positive emotions, it's related to better emotional well-being across time. So if you know that your child's been through a negative event and you are recollecting that negative event with your child, don't just name and explain the negative emotions. Name and explain the positive emotions, like, wow, but you were so brave, and I really liked it when you took a deep breath and you allowed the doctor to give you the injection. You were so kind, or yeah, you were so you were so patient with that friend or with that person. Okay, so refer to the positive emotions that your child experienced as well. And this last bit here on this slide is very interesting because it talks about redemption in the reconstruction of a negative experience. Okay, it's actually predictive of well-being. Now, what is redemption in this case? So, say your child's been through a really negative experience. So, coming back to my experience of when those girls wrote really nasty notes to me in primary 2, primary 3. Okay, if there was a redemption in the reconstruction of it, and my mother had taken it further and said, um, would you like to meet with me there, or would you like to reach out to them and try and find out what how you can be a friend to them, or what you can do to make things better? If there's some sort of redemption of that negative experience and reconstructing it so that it becomes a positive one, it actually contributes to your child's well-being even further. Now, obviously, life throws a lot of lemons at us, and sometimes you just cannot uh, redeem, everything, every negative thing in your life, in your child's life. But if you can, try to do that. Try to reconstruct the negative experience. Try to redeem whatever was positive about it, because it helps your child in the long term. Now, what are some of the things not to do? Okay, this is really important when you are reminiscing with your children. One of the things that has popped up in research is that if you highlight the other person's emotions, especially when you do it without providing explanations, it's actually not good for your child's well-being. So if you say something like, "Yeah, teacher was so angry with you," and you don't give a reason why, it actually builds a great deal of stress for your child and leads to negative mental health. Okay, and I think you can understand why, right? Because the child doesn't fully understand why somebody would be feeling that way, or what the child, what you can do to make things better. Your child is still a child. So researchers have said discussing whose emotions matter. In this case, when there's been a negative experience, and say there are people involved, what we should do as mothers is to discuss our child's emotions, not theirs, because they have to resolve it on their own. Tell yourself, yeah, 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 they're not my responsibility. But discussing your child's emotions is important, because your child's negative emotions need to be resolved. You need to help your child to make sense of that negative emotion, of that negative experience. Okay, it brings wholeness to your child. All right. Another thing that to watch out for, and I'm on my the last stretch of my talk now, is cultural context. I mentioned it a little bit already, but I'll just say a little bit more about this. I don't think you'll be surprised that studies have shown that European and European American adults, they have earlier memories and they have a greater number of childhood memories. They're also able to provide more specific details in their memories. Now, why is this the case? Well, researchers have postulated it's because in the Western worldview, there's always a focus on a person's unique individual identity. Like, oh, what did you say? And, what did you feel? And, what did you do? And, it's important to express yourself in that Western worldview. Whereas in the more Eastern worldviews, and of course this is changing, right? And Singapore tends to be a bit of a amalgamation of both. But in certain cultures, in certain Eastern cultures, remembering is more like a test. And I don't know about you, but as a teacher, I have been in situations where, there may be grandparents and parents and the child, in front of me, and they're trying to tell me a story. And it's a story about, say, they had a great weekend in the swimming pool. They spent Sunday in the swimming pool, and I remember there would be cases of grandparents or parents kind of starting to interrogate the child, like, so where did we go, and what did we do, and who did you see there, and what did you eat, and it's just a barrage of questions. And so remembering for the child is more like a test, like, oh yeah, who did we see there, and oh yeah, what did we do. And so in that case, the child is more likely to be in a relational hierarchy. I'm the child and I'm supposed to be remembering. Whereas in the Western worldview, it's more about expressing yourself, expressing your story, expressing your narrative, okay, expressing your identity. And there's a bit of a nuance to this, okay, to the Western Eastern difference. And researchers have found that some parents are highly elaborative, and some parents are very low in their abilities to elaborate on the past event. Okay, now what does high elaborative parents mean? High elaborative parents, they provide rich, embellished information about the event under discussion, and they elaborate upon the information their children provide. Like, yeah, you jumped into the pool, and then, they ask open-ended questions, and they give regular, mostly positive feedback. And then someone came, remember, someone came, the prompting, they're kind of trying to trigger the memory rather than, you guessed it, right? Rather than testing the child's memory. Okay. So, in this way, they are responsive to their children's participation, and they're providing a coherent structure for their child to remember the past. And low elaborative parents, they just ask a lot of questions. They initiate directive conversations that seek to elicit specific brackets correct answers from the child using repeated memory questions like, what did you eat, and who did we see, and what did you do? Okay, I'm sure it's, you've seen that or heard that, or I think if I think back, then probably moments where I've done that to my own children. Okay, so what about maternal elaboration? Are there ways in which we should be elaborating? How should we be elaborating? Well, first thing you have to remember is that it has been shown to be the best predictor for your children providing memory information, both immediately and in the long term. Okay, when you elaborate on your child's stories about past events, it has an impact not just on the here and now, but in your child's ability to remember in the long term. Now, how do we do this? How should mothers elaborate? Do we do it through quantity, sheer quantity, by giving lots and lots and lots of opportunities to rehearse details of memories? Or should we be focusing on developing an organized, emotionally coherent narrative of past events? It's obviously the quality. The quality of the way we elaborate matters, okay? When we've looked at elaborative quality, we've seen that it is associated with the child being specific in their memories. Okay, they tend to have more specific child memories than when you are just giving them lots and lots and lots of opportunities to remember things. It's the quality of how you remember, it's how you embellish, it's about how you contribute to that conversation, like, oh yes, and I remember this, do you remember that? And that's how that conversation should be going, where you're co-constructing and weaving that story together with your child. And remember this thing about specificity. When memories are more specific, children have more positive self-representations, more positive self-concepts, more positive identities of themselves. Okay, but a few other things to watch out for, okay? Because when we talk about elaboration, there is the possibility that we could go wrong when we elaborate, okay? One study was done on mothers who were quite high on attachment anxiety. And what does this mean? Attachment anxiety refers to mothers who feel insecure about their relationship with their child. Okay, and they tend to be quite elaborative when they talk to their children, but they're elaborative because they're anxious. And these children of anxious mothers have higher emotional and behavioral problems. Okay, so if you're talking with your child and you know you're anxious, it's actually best not to carry on with that conversation until you feel better. All right, because the more anxious you are, the more anxious your child is going to be. Another study was done on mothers with unresolved abuse histories, and this was specifically sexual abuse histories. And they were unfortunately more likely to engage in dialogues that involved a lot of emotional flooding. That means they got very emotional in the process of talking about past events. There was very poor organization of their thoughts, and the negative themes are very dysregulated. So they could be talking about sadness, and then suddenly they could be talking about anger, and there was no real coherence, no real structure in the way in which they were having that dialogue with their children. And this, as you can imagine, can disrupt the formation of a coherent self for the child. Okay, so these are the things to watch out for. When we as mothers are trying to remember past events with our children, it's important to remember that we are helping our children. We are the ones who are scaffolding our children's memories, and it's not our child who's being our therapist. Okay, so if you know there's a negative event that you're remembering, don't bring that to your child. When you reminisce, it's for your child's sake, and it's your child's memories that matter. And so, in summary, what do we mean, and how do we as mothers reminisce in a way that, blesses our children and makes them whole and healthy? Well, number one, have open, organized, and emotionally supportive dialogues. Number two, when we do that, we're actually developing coherent, consistent, and positive working models of the self. And number three, when we do that, we are actually developing our children's autobiographical memory specificity. Okay, that our children can be specific in their memories. All right, and so I come back to my book, and after having read it, and saying to my children, "Here, you can read it." I remember my youngest daughter read it and said, like, "Oh, did these things really happen to you?" Like, oh, "Mom," she said that to me, and I think that writing the book was my attempt to bring a resolution for all the ups and downs that I had running the preschool, and in bringing coherence to and wholeness to myself, I was able to, after having processed it, able to give it to my own children and say, yeah, these things happen, good, bad, not so good, but I give this to you, and here I've processed it, and I hope that you can understand why now. That that maybe there were days when mommy came back and mommy was in a very bad mood, or mommy was very stressed, or I wasn't always there, I was very busy. These are things that I hope they can process along with me, and that it brings resolution for them as well. Okay. I think that's all I've prepared for tonight. I just want to let you know that if you're looking for where to buy the book, Candid Creation Publishing, my publisher, has a QR code that's here now on the slides, and it'll bring you to Candid Creation's Lazada page where you can buy the book online. Okay. Now, if you're overseas and unfortunately you can't use this link, but the book is available on Amazon, and you can buy it as a Kindle or as a hard copy. Okay, I think that's it, and I am ready for your questions if you have any. Okay, for those of you who are looking forward to collecting the book, thank you. Okay, I've got a question. Yeah, thank you very much, Stan. Okay, the question was, the natural response is to block out the negative memory, the negative event for your child, and is it wrong? Yes, according to research, it is wrong, and I think what the research seems to be saying or indicating, and I've read a lot of these papers in the past 1-2 weeks, is that the more you block it out, the more you're not able to help your child to make sense of that negative experience. And so research is saying name the emotion and give a causal explanation for that emotion. Like, yeah, that was a really painful thing, when the doctor took you and had to put you on the operating table and stitch you up. um, so name it, name the fear, name the anxiety, give explanations for it. Yes, anyone would feel scared. Anyone would have felt pain in that situation. And then remember that thing about um, redemption and naming positive feelings as well. So name the positive feelings. But you were so brave, and I like that you held on to my hand and you didn't cry. That's naming the positive bits of that negative experience, and then trying to redeem it. Like, and now we know. Not to run in the playground anymore, or not to jump from the table anymore. Um, it won't happen again if you don't jump from that table anymore. You're not going to cut yourself on your head again. So yes, I think as parents we want to protect our children, we want to block it out. But I just again, from that experience I had with my own mom as a primary 2 student, having been bullied, if my mom hadn't come and said to me, those girls were mean to you, I think I would not have gotten over that situation. I would not have gotten over it. It really helped that my mom came and processed it with me. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Stan. Any more questions? Thanks very much, Alicia. Okay, so well, I mean, we've still got, I think, 2 minutes. If you'd like to just type in your questions right now, I mean, I'd love to hear your questions, because I'd love to know if there's anything else I can say that might help you. None? Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you very much for listening to me rattle on so much, and I hope you got something out of the talk. And if you haven't bought my book yet, I hope you'll consider buying it and letting me know what you thought of it. Okay? Thank you very much, everyone. Good night, and keep in touch. Bye.